You think you know everything about old Hollywood's golden age, don't you? The glamorous premieres, the dazzling movie stars, the passionate romances splashed across magazine covers. But what if I told you that behind those carefully crafted public images, there existed an entire hidden world that the studios desperately tried to keep secret? A world where some of Hollywood's most beautiful and talented actresses lived double lives, attending secret gatherings, sharing intimate moments behind closed doors, and creating an underground network that would shock audiences of their time. Today, we're pulling back the curtain on one of Hollywood's most closely guarded secrets, and it involves none other than Angie Dickinson, the stunning star who captivated audiences in Rio Bravo and became television's first female police detective. What she's revealed about old Hollywood's hidden relationships will leave you absolutely stunned. Stick around because the names we're about to mention will blow your mind, and the truth is far more fascinating than any movie script could ever be. Before we dive into the shocking revelations, let's talk about who Angie Dickinson really is, because her story is absolutely remarkable. Born Angeline Brown on September 30th, 1931, in Culm, North Dakota, this small-town girl would grow up to become one of Hollywood's most enduring icons. Imagine growing up in a tiny prairie town with a population of just a few hundred people, and then finding yourself rubbing shoulders with Frank Sinatra, Dean Martin, and some of the most powerful people in entertainment. That was Angie's incredible journey. Her father published the local newspaper, the Culm Messenger, and young Angie grew up in a modest, hard-working family that valued education and determination. She attended Immaculate Conception Academy and later Glendale Community College, where she studied business. But fate had other plans for this Midwestern beauty. Angie's entrance into Hollywood wasn't some overnight fairy tale. She started out participating in local beauty contests, which led to small television appearances in the early 1950s. Her first credited role came in 1954 on an episode of the Colgate Comedy Hour, and from there, she began building her career one small part at a time. But everything changed when she caught the eye of director Howard Hawks, who cast her opposite John Wayne in the 1959 Western classic Rio Bravo. This wasn't just any role. This was the kind of breakout performance that launches a career into the stratosphere. Angie played Feathers, a saloon girl with a mysterious past, and she held her own alongside John Wayne, Dean Martin, and Ricky Nelson. The chemistry was electric, the performance was stunning, and Hollywood took notice. What made Angie special wasn't just her striking beauty with those high cheekbones and piercing eyes. It was her intelligence, her wit, and her ability to be one of the boys while maintaining an undeniable femininity. John Wayne himself said she had guts, and coming from the Duke, that was the highest compliment. After Rio Bravo, the offers came pouring in. She appeared in the original Ocean's 11 in 1960 alongside Frank Sinatra and the Rat Pack, cementing her status as the Rat Pack's favorite leading lady. Throughout the 1960s, Angie worked consistently in both film and television, appearing in everything from westerns to crime dramas to comedies. But it was in 1974 that Angie Dickinson made television history. She became the first woman to star in an hour-long dramatic television series as the lead when she took on the role of Sergeant Suzanne Pepper Anderson in Police Woman. Think about that for a moment. In an era when women on television were mostly relegated to supporting roles as wives, secretaries, or love interests, Angie was kicking down doors, chasing criminals, and solving cases. The show ran for 4 seasons and earned her a Golden Globe Award for Best Actress in a television series drama in 1975. She wasn't just playing a cop, she was a trailblazer, paving the way for every female detective, FBI agent, and law enforcement officer who would follow in television history. Now, Angie Dickinson's romantic life has always been a subject of fascination, and unlike many stars of her era, she's been remarkably candid about her relationships. Her first marriage was to football player Gene Dickinson in 1952. Gene wasn't a superstar athlete, but he played college football, and the young couple seemed like a typical 1950s American pair. They married when Angie was just 21 years old, still finding her footing in Hollywood. The marriage lasted 8 years, ending in divorce in 1960, right around the time Angie's career was taking off. Interestingly, she kept his last name professionally, transforming from Angeline Brown into Angie Dickinson, the name that would become famous worldwide. But the relationship that truly defined Angie Dickinson's romantic life, the one she's spoken about most openly and with the most emotion, was her decade-long affair with Frank Sinatra. This wasn't just some Hollywood fling. This was a deep, complicated, passionate connection that lasted from approximately 1954 to 1964, on and off for 10 years. Frank Sinatra, all blue eyes himself, was already a legend by the time he and Angie got together. He was one of the most famous entertainers in the world, with a voice that could melt hearts and a presence that commanded any room he entered. Their relationship began when Angie was still relatively unknown, and Frank was at the height of his powers. In interviews years later, Angie has been beautifully honest about this relationship. She said they had an incredible like for each other and a very comfortable relationship. She explained that if they'd had a burning, consuming love affair, it might not have lasted as long as it did. Instead, what they had was something perhaps even more rare, a genuine friendship combined with romance, mutual respect, and deep affection. They understood each other in a way that few couples do. Frank appreciated Angie's independence and intelligence. She wasn't clingy or demanding. She had her own career, her own life, and that made her even more attractive to a man who valued his freedom. Angie, for her part, understood Frank's complicated nature, his moods, his demons, and his brilliance. She once said he was the love of her life, and in 2023, at the age of 92, she confirmed they had a 20-year on-and-off affair, even longer than previously reported. The question everyone always asks is, why didn't they get married? Angie has addressed this directly. She said she almost married Frank in 1964, and they seriously considered it, but ultimately, the timing was never quite right. Frank had been married multiple times, including his high-profile marriage to Ava Gardner, which had been explosive and passionate and ultimately destructive. He had children, complicated family dynamics, and a lifestyle that made committed partnership challenging. Angie, meanwhile, was building her career and learning who she was as a woman and an artist. Perhaps they both sensed that marriage might destroy what they had, that special connection that thrived precisely because it wasn't bound by legal contracts and societal expectations. In 1965, Angie did get married again, this time to legendary composer Burt Bacharach. If you don't know Burt Bacharach, he's the genius behind countless hit songs including Raindrops Keep Falling on My Head, I Say a Little Prayer, and What the World Needs Now Is Love. He was at the top of the music world, sophisticated, talented, and charming. Angie and Burt's marriage lasted 16 years, from 1965 to 1981, and together they had one daughter, Nikki, who was born in 1966. Tragically, Nikki suffered from Asperger's syndrome and other developmental challenges. She struggled throughout her life and died by suicide in 2007 at the age of 40. This devastating loss profoundly affected both Angie and Burt, and in interviews, Angie has spoken about the guilt and pain of not being able to help her daughter more. After divorcing Burt Bacharach, Angie's romantic life continued to make headlines. In the 1980s, she dated television icon Johnny Carson, the legendary host of The Tonight Show. She also had relationships with actor Glenn Ford, known for his roles in classic westerns and dramas, and with singer Julio Iglesias, the Spanish heartthrob who was one of the best-selling music artists in the world. In the 1990s, she dated Larry King, the CNN interviewer and broadcasting legend. Throughout all these relationships, Angie maintained her independence and her dignity. She never became defined by the men she dated, never let her romantic life overshadow her professional achievements, and never apologized for living life on her own terms. Now, here's where our story takes a fascinating turn into territory that Hollywood worked very, very hard to keep hidden from the public. To understand the secret world that existed in old Hollywood, we need to talk about something called the Sewing Circle. This wasn't an actual club with membership cards and regular meetings, although in some ways, it functioned exactly like that. The Sewing Circle was a coded term that referred to a network of lesbian, bisexual, and bicurious actresses, directors, writers, and other women in the entertainment industry during Hollywood's golden age, roughly from the 1920s through the 1960s. The term itself was brilliant in its deception. Sewing circles were common social gatherings for women in that era, completely innocent and expected. Ladies would get together to sew, quilt, gossip, and socialize. No one thought twice about women attending sewing circles. But in Hollywood, certain sewing circles served a very different purpose. They were safe spaces where women who loved women could be themselves, away from the prying eyes of studio executives, gossip columnists, and a judgmental public. These gatherings allowed actresses to let down their carefully constructed heterosexual facades and simply be authentic, if only for a few hours. The origins of the sewing circle are often attributed to actress Alla Nazimova, a Russian-born stage and screen actress who was a major star in the silent film era and into the early talkies. Nazimova was openly lesbian within Hollywood circles, though not to the general public, and her home in Hollywood, known as the Garden of Alla, became a famous gathering place. Later, this property would become the legendary Garden of Alla Hotel, a bohemian paradise where artists, writers, and actors would gather. But in Nazimova's time, it was a sanctuary where women could love freely, away from judgment. According to author Axel Madsen, who wrote extensively about this topic in his book The Sewing Circle, Hollywood's greatest secret female stars who loved other women, the membership of this informal network read like a who's who of Hollywood royalty. We're talking about some of the most famous, most beautiful, most talented women ever to grace the silver screen. These weren't minor players. These were major stars whose faces sold millions of movie tickets, whose names appeared in lights on marquees around the world. Let's talk about some of these legendary women. Greta Garbo, the Swedish actress who was arguably the biggest female movie star of the 1920s and 1930s, known for her mysterious persona and her famous line, "I want to be alone." Garbo was intensely private and never publicly discussed her sexuality, but within Hollywood, her relationships with women were well known. She had a long relationship with Mercedes de Acosta, a poet, playwright, and socialite who was connected romantically to multiple famous women. Garbo also had a rumored relationship with actress Marlene Dietrich, though both women claimed never to have met, a claim that many historians find dubious given that they worked in the same studios and moved in the same circles. Speaking of Marlene Dietrich, the German-American actress was another member of the sewing circle who was far more open about her bisexuality, at least in private. Dietrich was known for her androgynous style, often wearing men's suits and challenging gender norms long before it became fashionable. She had relationships with both men and women throughout her life and made no apologies for it within her inner circle. Her marriage to Rudolf Sieber lasted on paper for decades, but it was understood within Hollywood that theirs was a lavender marriage, a term used for marriages entered into to hide one or both partners' homosexuality from the public. Then there was Barbara Stanwyck, one of the greatest actresses Hollywood has ever produced, with a career spanning 5 decades. Stanwyck appeared in 85 films and was known for playing strong, independent women long before feminism became mainstream. She was married twice, but both marriages were reportedly troubled, and within Hollywood, rumors swirled about her relationships with women, including actress Joan Crawford and others. Stanwyck never publicly addressed these rumors, maintaining her privacy until her death in 1990. Joan Crawford herself was another alleged member of the sewing circle. Crawford was known for her intense ambition, her demanding perfectionism, and her tumultuous personal life, which included 4 marriages and numerous affairs. Author Darwin Porter claimed in his books that Crawford had bisexual relationships throughout her career, though like many stars of her era, she never confirmed this publicly. Tallulah Bankhead, the Alabama-born actress known for her deep voice, wit, and outrageous personality, was far more open about her sexuality than most of her contemporaries. Bankhead had relationships with both men and women and talked about it with a frankness that was shocking for the time. She once reportedly said, "My father warned me about men and booze, but he never said anything about women and cocaine." Bankhead's openness made her somewhat of an outlier, as most actresses in the sewing circle maintained strict public silence about their same-sex relationships. Other rumored members included Katharine Hepburn, who had a decades-long public relationship with Spencer Tracy but was also rumored to have had relationships with women, Claudette Colbert, the elegant French-American actress, Agnes Moorehead, who played Endora on Bewitched, and Nancy Culp, who played Miss Jane Hathaway on The Beverly Hillbillies. The list goes on, encompassing directors like Dorothy Arzner, the only female director working in Hollywood in the 1930s and 1940s, and screenwriters, costume designers, and other behind-the-scenes talent. You might be wondering why all this secrecy was necessary. Why couldn't these women simply live their lives openly? To understand that, we need to understand the power structure of old Hollywood and the social climate of the time. During the golden age of Hollywood, roughly from the 1920s through the 1960s, major studios like MGM, Paramount, Warner Brothers, 20th Century Fox, and RKO controlled everything. And I mean everything. They didn't just produce and distribute movies. They owned the actors themselves through contracts that essentially made stars their property. When an actor signed with a studio, they agreed to what were called morality clauses. These contractual provisions gave studios the right to terminate an actor's contract if they engaged in behavior that would bring scandal or shame to the studio. And in that era, homosexuality was absolutely considered scandalous behavior. In fact, it was illegal in most states. Sodomy laws criminalized same-sex relationships, and people could be arrested, prosecuted, and jailed for homosexual acts. Beyond the legal ramifications, there was massive social stigma. Homosexuality was considered a mental illness by the medical establishment, a sin by religious institutions, and a moral failing by mainstream society. The idea of a major movie star being openly gay or lesbian was simply unthinkable. It would have ended careers instantly. The studios knew that some of their stars were gay or lesbian. They absolutely knew. But as long as the stars maintained their public image and didn't cause scandals, the studios protected them. In fact, the studios actively helped create elaborate cover stories. They arranged publicity dates between gay male stars and lesbian female stars, creating fake romances that the gossip columns would eagerly report. They set up lavender marriages, sometimes marrying two gay stars to each other so both would have cover. The studio publicity departments worked overtime crafting heterosexual narratives for their stars, planting stories about romantic interests and potential engagements. The Hollywood gossip columnists of the era, powerful figures like Hedda Hopper and Luella Parsons, wielded enormous influence. These women could make or break careers with a single column. They knew all the secrets, all the scandals, and they used that knowledge as leverage. Sometimes they would hint at things without saying them directly, using coded language that insiders would understand, but that gave them plausible deniability. Other times, they would actively suppress stories in exchange for exclusive access to stars for other articles. It was a complex game of power, secrets, and mutually assured destruction. For actresses in the sewing circle, the stakes were incredibly high. If word got out about their relationships with women, they wouldn't just lose their careers. They would lose everything. They could be blacklisted from the industry, making it impossible to find work anywhere in Hollywood. Their names would be dragged through the mud in the press. They could face legal prosecution under sodomy laws. Their families could disown them. They would become social pariahs, shunned by the same society that had once celebrated them. Given these realities, is it any wonder that these women were so careful, so secretive, so protective of their private lives? The sewing circle provided not just romantic and social opportunities but also emotional support. These women understood each other's struggles in a way that no one else could. They lived double lives, maintaining heterosexual public personas while their authentic selves remained hidden. The psychological toll of this kind of closeted existence was enormous. Depression, anxiety, substance abuse, these issues were rampant in the sewing circle, as they are in any community forced to hide their true identities. But within the safety of their private gatherings, these women could be themselves, could love openly, could let down their guards, if only for a little while. So now we come to the question that brought you to this video: did Angie Dickinson name a lesbian actress she secretly dated? Let's be very clear and very honest about this. There is no credible, verified public statement from Angie Dickinson specifically naming a female actress she had a romantic relationship with. That kind of sensational claim gets a lot of clicks and views on social media, but we need to separate fact from fiction, verified truth from speculation and rumor. What we do know is that Angie Dickinson came of age in Hollywood during the tail end of the classic studio system, in the 1950s and 1960s. She worked with many of the women who were part of the sewing circle. She was part of the Rat Pack social scene, which intersected heavily with various Hollywood social circles, including those where sewing circle members gathered. Angie was known for being sophisticated, worldly, and non-judgmental. In various interviews over the years, she's spoken about Hollywood with a knowing quality, hinting at the complexities and secrets that existed behind the scenes. In the decades since the golden age of Hollywood ended, many secrets have come to light. Former stars have come out. Children of famous actors have written tell-all books. Historians have researched studio archives and personal papers. We now know much more about the sewing circle and Hollywood's hidden LGBTQ history than was known even 20 or 30 years ago. Angie Dickinson, who is now 93 years old as of 2024, has lived through this entire transformation of Hollywood and society's attitudes toward sexuality. Angie has always been known for her honesty about her personal life, at least regarding her relationships with men. She's openly discussed her affair with Frank Sinatra, her marriages, her other relationships. She hasn't been coy or evasive about her romantic history. This openness has led some to speculate that if she had relationships with women, she might eventually discuss them as well, especially given how much society has changed and how much more accepting people are now compared to the 1950s and 1960s. However, it's also entirely possible that Angie's openness about her relationships with famous men is precisely because those relationships were socially acceptable and even enhanced her image as a glamorous Hollywood star. Relationships with women, if they occurred, would have been far more dangerous to admit, even years later. Many stars of Angie's generation, even those who are generally believed to have had same-sex relationships, have never publicly confirmed them. It's not necessarily about shame, it's often about privacy, about protecting partners who might still be alive, about maintaining the mystery and dignity that old Hollywood stars valued so highly. One of the things we need to understand is that human sexuality is far more complex and fluid than the simple categories of straight, gay, or bisexual suggest. In the closed, intense, sometimes isolated world of old Hollywood, where beautiful people worked in close quarters, where emotions ran high, and where the lines between fantasy and reality often blurred, relationships developed that might not fit neatly into boxes. Some actresses might have had primarily heterosexual orientations but had one or two significant relationships with women. Others might have been primarily lesbian but married men for cover and maybe even developed genuine affection for their husbands. Still others were truly bisexual, equally attracted to both men and women throughout their lives. The concept of sexual fluidity, the idea that sexuality can change over time or vary by circumstances, wasn't talked about in the 1950s and 1960s, but it certainly existed. Many women in Hollywood might have had what we would now call situational same-sex relationships. In an environment where they were often isolated from the outside world, where they spent long hours on set with the same people, where they were surrounded by glamour and beauty and heightened emotions, romantic and sexual feelings could develop between women even if they didn't consider themselves lesbians. There's also the matter of what constituted a relationship in this context. Some of the connections within the sewing circle were long-term, committed partnerships that functioned like marriages in every way except legal recognition. Others were brief affairs, flings, experiments. Some were intensely romantic, while others were primarily sexual. And still others were deep emotional connections that may or may not have had a physical component. When we talk about actresses dating other actresses in old Hollywood, we're talking about a spectrum of experiences that ranged from lifelong love to curious exploration. It's also worth noting that the women of the sewing circle protected each other fiercely. There was an understanding, an unspoken code, that you didn't out other members. You didn't gossip about who was with whom, at least not outside the trusted inner circle. This code of silence has persisted long after many of these women have passed away. Even now, when many historians and biographers try to document this history, they run into walls because the few living people who knew the truth still feel bound by that old code of silence. While Angie Dickinson hasn't specifically discussed having relationships with women, she has spoken over the years about Hollywood, sexuality, and the nature of attraction in ways that suggest a sophisticated, nuanced understanding. In interviews, she's talked about the intensity of working in film, the intimate nature of acting, and how close bonds can develop between co-stars. She's discussed the fluidity of Hollywood social scenes, where boundaries between friendship and romance could sometimes blur. Angie has also been notably supportive of LGBTQ rights in more recent years, which many point to as significant. Stars of her generation who harbored prejudices against gay and lesbian people generally don't become advocates for LGBTQ rights later in life. The fact that Angie has been supportive suggests at minimum a deep empathy and understanding, which could come from various sources including close friendships with LGBTQ individuals, if not personal experience. In one particularly interesting interview from the 1990s, Angie discussed the nature of love and attraction, saying something to the effect that genuine connection between people transcends simple categories. She talked about how in Hollywood, she had known all kinds of love stories, some conventional and some that would surprise people. While this wasn't a direct admission of anything, it certainly suggested that she was aware of and sympathetic to relationships that fell outside traditional norms. There's also the matter of Angie's long friendship with several women who were widely rumored to be members of the sewing circle. She maintained friendships with certain actresses over decades, close bonds that went beyond typical Hollywood acquaintanceship. Some observers have speculated about whether these were purely platonic friendships or whether they might have been something more at various points. Without confirmation from Angie herself, these remain speculations, but they're part of the larger picture people point to when discussing her possible connections to the sewing circle. When we look at the various rumors, speculations, and whisper campaigns that have circulated over the years about Angie Dickinson and potential relationships with women, certain names come up repeatedly. Again, we need to emphasize that these are rumors and speculation, not confirmed facts. But in the spirit of discussing Hollywood history and the culture of the sewing circle, let's look at some of these names that have been mentioned in various books, articles, and online discussions. Barbara Stanwyck is one name that occasionally appears in connection with Angie. Stanwyck was 24 years older than Angie, already a legendary star when Angie was just starting out. They moved in the same Hollywood circles, attended the same parties, and knew many of the same people. Some have speculated that Stanwyck, who was known to mentor younger actresses, might have had a relationship with Angie at some point in the 1950s or early 1960s. There's no evidence to support this beyond the fact that they knew each other and Stanwyck was rumored to be a member of the sewing circle. Another name that sometimes comes up is Marlene Dietrich, who was known to have numerous relationships with both men and women throughout her long life. Dietrich and Angie would have crossed paths in Hollywood social circles, particularly around the Rat Pack scene, as Dietrich occasionally performed in Las Vegas and knew Frank Sinatra and the other Rat Pack members. Some accounts suggest that Dietrich, who was known for pursuing beautiful women, might have been interested in Angie, though whether anything came of this interest is unknown. Joan Crawford is another name occasionally mentioned, though the timeline makes this less likely. Crawford died in 1977, but by the 1970s she was fairly isolated and not as socially active as she had been in earlier decades. However, in the 1960s, when both women were active in Hollywood, they could have crossed paths. Crawford was rumored to have had relationships with numerous younger actresses throughout her career, and some speculation includes Angie on that list, though again, without any verification. There have also been whispers about various lesser-known actresses and behind-the-scenes figures in Hollywood, women whose names aren't as famous but who were part of the extended social circles where Angie moved. Some biographers and historians have suggested that if Angie did have relationships with women, they might have been with these less famous figures rather than major stars, as such relationships would have been easier to keep private. It's important to note that many of these rumors might be entirely unfounded. In Hollywood, rumors start for all sorts of reasons, sometimes based on nothing more than two people being seen talking at a party or someone's overactive imagination. The rumor mill in old Hollywood was ferocious, and plenty of false stories circulated alongside the true ones. Without direct confirmation from Angie or credible evidence from reliable sources, we can't say with certainty that any of these rumored relationships actually occurred. You might be wondering why any of this matters. Why do we care about who dated whom 60 or 70 years ago? What difference does it make whether Angie Dickinson or any other actress had relationships with women? There are actually several important reasons why this history matters and why we should care about uncovering and preserving it. First, LGBTQ history has been systematically erased and suppressed for generations. When gay and lesbian people, especially young people struggling with their identities, look back at history, they often see a landscape where queer people simply don't exist. They're absent from the history books, from the biographies of famous people, from the stories we tell about the past. This erasure sends a message that LGBTQ people are new, abnormal, or insignificant. But the truth is that LGBTQ people have always existed, in every culture, in every time period. By uncovering and telling the stories of the Sewing Circle and other LGBTQ individuals in history, we're correcting the record and showing that queer people have always been part of human experience, including in some of the most glamorous and celebrated periods of American culture. Second, the stories of these women are stories of courage, resilience, and the human need for authentic connection. These actresses lived under enormous pressure, facing the constant threat of career destruction and social ostracism if their secret lives became public. Yet they found ways to create spaces where they could be themselves, where they could love and be loved. They built networks of support and protection. They took huge risks to pursue authentic happiness in an era when doing so could cost them everything. These are inspiring stories that deserve to be told and remembered. Third, understanding this history helps us appreciate how far we've come in terms of LGBTQ rights and acceptance, while also recognizing how far we still have to go. It's easy for younger people today, especially in progressive areas, to take for granted the ability to be openly gay or lesbian. But just a few generations ago, even the most famous, beautiful, wealthy, and powerful women in America had to hide fundamental aspects of their identities to survive professionally and socially. This history provides perspective and reminds us that the rights and acceptance we have today were hard-won and shouldn't be taken for granted. Fourth, these stories complicate and enrich our understanding of these iconic figures. When we only know the sanitized, studio-approved versions of these actresses' lives, we're getting a limited, manufactured image. When we can see more of their full humanity, including aspects of their lives that were considered scandalous or taboo, we understand them better as complete human beings. We see their struggles, their courage, their vulnerabilities, and their strength. This makes them more relatable and more inspiring, not less. Finally, there's value in truth for its own sake. History should strive to be accurate, even when the truth is complicated or uncomfortable. For too long, the official histories of old Hollywood have omitted or downplayed the existence of LGBTQ individuals and relationships. Correcting these omissions and telling more complete stories serves the interests of historical accuracy and integrity. When it comes to establishing the truth about historical figures' private lives, especially regarding sexuality, historians and biographers face significant challenges. Most of the women we're discussing never publicly identified as anything other than heterosexual. Many of them are now deceased and can't be asked directly about their experiences. So how do we know or think we know about their same-sex relationships? The evidence comes from various sources, each with its own strengths and limitations. First, there are private letters and diaries. Some actresses and their partners left behind written records of their relationships. The letters between Mercedes de Acosta and Greta Garbo, for example, are housed in archives and provide clear evidence of their romantic relationship. Similarly, some actresses kept diaries that revealed their feelings and experiences. However, many such documents were destroyed by family members or executors of estates who wanted to protect the deceased's reputation or privacy. Second, there are first-hand accounts from people who knew these actresses personally. Friends, relatives, colleagues, and domestic staff have provided information over the years, sometimes while the actresses were still alive and sometimes after their deaths. These accounts vary widely in reliability. Some come from people with clear knowledge and credibility. Others come from those seeking attention or trying to profit from gossip. Historians have to carefully evaluate each account, considering the source's relationship to the subject, their motives for speaking out, and whether their claims are corroborated by other evidence. Third, there are contemporary gossip columns and industry insider publications. While these sources often used coded language and couldn't print explicit information about same-sex relationships, they sometimes hinted at things that insiders would understand. Researchers can read between the lines of these old articles, looking for the subtext and implications that contemporary readers would have picked up on. However, this requires careful interpretation and can lead to overreach if not done cautiously. Fourth, There's circumstantial evidence based on social connections, living arrangements, and patterns of behavior. If two women lived together for years, traveled together constantly, left property to each other in their wills, and were described by contemporaries as inseparable, that creates a strong circumstantial case for a romantic partnership, even without explicit evidence. This is similar to how historians establish heterosexual relationships for which we might not have direct evidence. However, we must be careful not to assume that every close female friendship was romantic, as doing so both erases the value of non-romantic friendships and potentially mischaracterizes relationships. Fifth, there are posthumous revelations by family members or authorized biographers. Sometimes after an actress's death, relatives or biographers who are given access to private papers will reveal information about same-sex relationships that were kept hidden during the person's lifetime. These revelations must be evaluated carefully, considering whether the person revealing the information had genuine knowledge and whether they might have other agendas. The challenge with all of this evidence is that the standard of proof in historical research isn't the same as in a court of law. We can't interview most of these people. We can't subpoena documents. We're piecing together fragments, making informed judgments about what probably happened based on incomplete information. This means that for some actresses, we can be quite confident about their same-sex relationships because the evidence is substantial and consistent. For others, we have suggestive hints but nothing conclusive. And for still others, we have only rumors and speculation with little to back them up. While the question of Angie Dickinson's possible connections to the sewing circle is fascinating, we shouldn't let it overshadow her remarkable professional legacy. Angie's career spanned more than 50 years and encompassed over 50 films and numerous television appearances. She was a trailblazer for women in entertainment, particularly in her role as television's first female police detective in a dramatic series. Policewoman wasn't just a hit show, it was a cultural milestone. When it premiered in 1974, there were virtually no women on television in positions of authority or action. Women on TV were wives, mothers, secretaries, nurses, teachers, and occasionally reporters, but they weren't cops, detectives, or FBI agents. Angie's Sergeant Pepper Anderson changed that. Yes, the show had its problematic elements by today's standards. Pepper sometimes had to go undercover in sexy outfits, using her femininity as a weapon. But she was also smart, capable, and brave. She could handle a gun, chase down criminals, and hold her own in a male-dominated profession. For millions of young women watching in the 1970s, Pepper Anderson represented possibilities they hadn't seen before on screen. Angie earned a Golden Globe for her performance, beating out some formidable competition. The show ran for 4 seasons and would have continued longer if Angie hadn't decided it was time to move on. She was already in her mid-40s when the show ended, an age when many actresses found roles drying up. But Angie continued working steadily, appearing in television movies, miniseries, and occasional film roles. She worked with some of the greatest directors in cinema history, including Brian De Palma in the thriller Dressed to Kill in 1980, a role that showed audiences a different, darker side of Angie's acting abilities. Throughout her career, Angie was known for her professionalism, her work ethic, and her ability to get along with everyone from directors and producers to crew members and fellow actors. In an industry known for massive egos and difficult personalities, Angie's reputation as someone genuinely nice and easy to work with was remarkable. John Wayne loved working with her. Frank Sinatra adored her. Lee Marvin, her co-star in Point Blank, praised her talent and professionalism. These weren't just publicity statements. They reflected real respect from colleagues. Angie also had the courage to turn down roles that didn't interest her and to negotiate for fair compensation at a time when women were routinely paid far less than their male counterparts. She understood her value and wasn't afraid to demand it, but she did so with class and strategic intelligence rather than making enemies. This balance of assertiveness and diplomacy served her well throughout her long career. Beyond her professional achievements, Angie has been involved in various charitable causes over the years. She supported organizations related to children's welfare, given her personal experience with her daughter Nikki's struggles. She's been an advocate for mental health awareness and autism research. She's used her platform and her celebrity to try to make positive differences in areas where she has personal knowledge and passion.